For decades, America has tried to combat the harms of drug use primarily through banning drugs and incarcerating people who use them. But this has caused a violent underground market for drugs, increasing crime in our communities. It's caused contaminated substances, increasing overdose deaths, and it's caused incarceration to skyrocket, destabilizing families. What we're doing isn't working. Crime, death, and broken families are the collateral damage of using the criminal justice system to address the public health issue of drugs. If you're looking for a better path forward, you're in the right place. What if we changed our drug policies to prioritize life, health, harm reduction, and thriving? And what if it benefited all of us? Our criminal justice approach to drugs had a beginning, and it can have an end. Join us on the journey to end it for good. I'm Christina Dent, your host, and if you're new here, End It for Good is a nonprofit started in 2019, based in Mississippi, that invites people to support approaches to drugs that prioritize life and the opportunity to thrive. This podcast is one of the ways we do that. You can head over to episode 34 to hear my story as a conservative Christian foster mom, changing my own mind on the best path forward with drugs, and then come on back and dive in deeper. I didn't change my mind overnight, and most other people don't either. We all need time to learn, think, ask questions, and explore. Whatever your perspective is, I'm glad you're here. Let's journey together. Welcome back to the End It for Good podcast. I'm Christina Dent, your host. Excited today to talk to Colonel Steven Maxwell, and would encourage you, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, go ahead and do that now. If you are not connected with us in any other way, go ahead and head over to enditforgood.com, and you can get on our newsletter. We send it out every 2 weeks. That's where we send out event information, new podcasts, and all the things. So we'd love to have you there. And of course, if you'd like to support the work of End It for Good, you can do that also at enditforgood.com/donate. On to our show. So Colonel Steven Maxwell, he is a decorated law enforcement officer. He's got 30 years of public service with the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics, including serving as the executive director. He's a lifelong resident of Mississippi with a bachelor's degree in corrections from Langston University and a master's degree in public administration from the University of Southern Mississippi. And he's also a graduate of the FBI 252nd National Academy class. And he served as an adjunct faculty member. So, Colonel Maxwell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, you spent 30 years with the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. You rose to executive director. Early in your career, how did you understand the drug problem?
Early on in my career, my understanding of issues that emanate out of the drug culture was microscopic in content. I thought that focusing on identifying individuals who were involved in the manufacture, trafficking, distribution, sale, and use of drugs was the end-all, be-all to solving society's problems as it relates to the use of drugs leading to addiction and all of the trauma associated with it. So it was microscopic in context at that time.
And what did success look like to you then?
Well, success at that particular point in time in my career looked like arresting as many people as possible, executing as many search warrants as possible, seizing as much drugs as possible, and also any assets that we could incriminate as it relates to laws that were broken at the local, state, and federal level associated with the illegal distribution, possession, trafficking, and use of drugs.
So it really was focused on that enforcement piece of how many people are breaking the law. Let's go find them. Let's enforce the law. And instead of kind of taking that broader view of kind of what's happening and why that's happening. So how did you see addiction at that time? Did you see it as a criminal behavior, a personal choice, or a public safety or health issue? How did you view addiction in particular early in your career?
My view of addiction at that time was within the context of people who were addicted to drugs. They made that choice of their own volition. And as they made a choice to use drugs that led to their addiction, my understanding was they could make a choice to not use drugs and walk away from it. But I learned as my career began to evolve, that was not necessarily the case at all.
And what point, how did that shift begin to happen for you? How did you begin to sense that enforcement alone wasn't going to produce the outcomes that we hoped for? Maybe there was more going on with addiction.
Well, a part of my training entering into law enforcement was to always focus on the who, what, why, when, and where of a particular crime that was committed, specifically in my case, drug crime. And so that focusing on the who, what, why, when, and where, along with my curiosity associated with research and wanting to be familiar with not just correlational factors, but causational factors, it caused me to begin to do research on how do people find themselves in a position where they're even making the decision to use drugs. And once I did that, it opened my mind up to research in other areas, other disciplines that was also focused on the who, what, why, when, and where of people finding themselves in this abyss of addiction.
Was there specific cases or patterns that kind of helped you begin to make those connections?
It was a combination of things. It was a combination of drug investigations. It was a combination of exposure to individuals working in other disciplines, such as psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, and therapists. Those personal one on one interactions with people who were living in addiction, as well as my own family members who were struggling with drug addiction and mental health issues. And at the time, I was unfamiliar with the term comorbidity. I was unfamiliar with the term dual diagnosis. And as I began to interact more with individuals who were working in the same space that I was in different disciplines, as our disciplines converged one on the other, focusing on improving public safety and public health, I began to learn more about the fact that drug addiction was not a moral failure. People were making decisions based on external and internal factors that I never considered because I wasn't educated in that arena.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to real quick go back to kind of how did you decide to get into law enforcement and specifically to work in, like, your whole law enforcement career was specifically working in drugs. You worked for the Bureau of Narcotics. How did you get into that? Because I think that's really interesting of just, you obviously have a lot of curiosity about how people behave and why they do the things they do, and you went on to get further education in that. How did you even get into this world to begin with?
Well, I understood early on in life that success was facilitated through partnerships and relationships. And so that is what helped me become a successful student athlete, middle school, high school, and in college. And after college, I started working for a company that I worked for during the summers in college, which was Hudson Salvage. And I started off there working in the stock room and got promoted to security, went from security to manager. I always had a desire to enter into law enforcement. And one day I was in charge of selling a stock of boat motors, Suzuki boat motors. And I was doing pretty good, willing and dealing. And two law enforcement officers walked in on this particular day. One was an IRS agent, and another was an agent working for the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. And they were challenging me back and forth on the price of the boat motors. And the MBN agent, Chuck Smith at the time, he asked me if that was something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I said, no, I really would like to enter into law enforcement. He began to talk to me about the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics, and that led to me being hired on in 1994 with MBN.
Wow. So you went straight there. You did, that was your whole career, really was in narcotics.
Yes, my law enforcement career began with the Bureau of Narcotics. I was there for 30 years. Uh, Shortly after about a 30-year tenure there, I had an opportunity to join the Mississippi Department of Corrections, which is where I am now. And it's come full circle because my major in college was corrections administration. I never thought that I would, at some point in time in my career, enter and work in corrections, but here I am, and it's really a great punctuation of a 30-year career focused on identifying individuals who violated drug laws, arresting them, and then seeing their cases flow through the judicial system and then being placed under the jurisdiction of corrections. And being here, I get to see the same issues that I saw at play in society for those who are not under the jurisdiction of the corrections institution remain in play here as these individuals try to prepare themselves to leave the corrections ecosystem and enter back into society and be productive citizens.
Yeah. Has that given you more or less hope about the whole process? How has that shift in your career towards kind of the next step of, you spent a long time investigating, arresting, moving towards, the next step of prosecution. Now you're seeing more of the back end on the correction side of people that are in prison. What do you think do you have more or less hope kind of about the approach that we're taking and whether or not we're making the shifts that need to happen to help people be able to come out of incarceration ready to build productive lives?
Well, I'm extremely encouraged, but what I can tell you is change has occurred and it is occurring where I would like to see, and many members of society would like to see, that change move as fast as a cheetah or a gazelle could run, but it appears that the change is moving about as fast as a turtle could run. So it's occurring, but I don't. But I think we would all be more encouraged than what we are if it moved at a much faster pace. What I can tell you about the Mississippi Bureau of Corrections is that the individuals who are currently under the jurisdiction of MDOC, they have opportunities to continue and advance their education. They have opportunities to develop a skill set or refine a skill set that they had prior to being placed under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections. In addition to that, they have opportunities to enter into alcohol and drug treatment programs. The unfortunate thing is we can't force them, but those opportunities are there. If it's court ordered, those opportunities are there for them to participate. And one of the things that I think highlights the programs that are ongoing within MDOC, which don't get a lot of promoting, if you would say, is that Commissioner Kane believes in treating the individual as a whole, okay, focusing on developing those skill sets, making sure that we provide the biological health care and psychological care that they need, but also giving them an opportunity to exercise their faith and focus on their inner being. Okay, for some that's their spirit, for others it might just be their psychological being, but focusing on the moral aspect of the individual. And we have individuals who have participated in a program where they've gone on and they've gotten bachelor's degrees in theology. Some have actually gone on and gotten master's degrees and PhDs, and they've become chaplains within MDOC. And for those who have been released, they've gone on and continued that work through their faith.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I love to see, like you said, I think all of us agree, we want to see change happen faster. We know there's good changes happening. We want to see even more of them, even faster. Nothing tends to change really fast that's life. It's just really difficult for change to get momentum, especially in big systems. And everything we're talking about are big systems. So talk a little bit about how your thinking shifted as you continued your education, because I know that's been a big part of kind of your journey and what you're still involved in now and teaching classes and things like that. What did you learn along the way as you pursued higher education that continued to help kind of inform and shift your thinking? I have another friend who's a former narcotics officer, and he had a very similar journey. He went to go back to school and complete a degree, and that was kind of the thing that began broadening his perspective to see outside of just the work that he was doing. And, that's not... when you're trained to be a police officer, you're not trained to be a police officer plus a mental health professional plus a psychologist plus all of these things. You're trained to enforce the law. And so it is. I don't say that to say that this is it's a lack of knowledge that's not part of the particular training of law enforcement. It's not, you're not trained for 2 years in how to treat addiction or be a mental health professional. But it was interesting that this kind of higher education piece of beginning to see those bigger systems that are at work there was a part of numerous people that I know who've kind of had this shifting in thinking. So what did that fill in for you that your kind of everyday experience on the job didn't expose you to?
Decision making is a critical factor in life. The decisions that we make and the actions that we take shape and frame the environment that we live our lives in. Those decisions emanate from our mindset. Mindset is formulated from your beliefs, values, morals, and norms. To improve your decision making, personally and professionally, one of the things that you have to do is you have to expand your knowledge base. But you have to ensure that that knowledge base is founded in and founded on empirical data derived from scientific research. And the importance of scientific research, the importance of understanding data, the importance of digesting quality data, the scientific data, is a critical piece of improved decision making. And so I became focused on that. I became focused on increasing my ability to improve my decision making process. And through that, becoming familiar with data, becoming familiar with scientific research and how we go from one position to another position and understanding all the space in between and why people go in a completely different direction was one of the driving factors that led me to a much more expanded view of everything that we were dealing with as it relates to issues that emanate out of the drug culture. And improved and increased positive, constructive decision making is not only critical for law enforcement officers, but as you know, healthcare professionals, lawmakers, and anyone who is in a position where the decisions that they make and the actions that they take impact the quality of life and the health and public safety of any specific constituency or community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think back to my own learning journey, and it was kind of, I can see my own learning journey as first just focused on the behavior someone did. Like, well, they did something that was wrong. And that was kind of all I thought about it. And then that beginning to expand that view of like, why did they do that behavior in the first place? And then is our response to the behavior helping or hurting on the back end, like way down the line? Is it solving the root cause of why they were using, like just that beginning to go upstream and downstream a little further than just kind of what's immediately in front of you?
Right, yeah, absolutely. You and I talked about this in a previous conversation. And in that analogy, when I entered in law enforcement in 1994, I entered the process or the systems of issues midstream. And I was trained to enter it midstream. And that's why my focus was what it was on. Because as law enforcement officers, we're trained to see bad guy, get bad guy, or bad person, get bad person. But as my career began to evolve, I did exactly just that. I wanted to go as far upstream as possible, find out why people were jumping in the river, why they were falling in the river, who was shoving them in the river, and identify not just the correlational, but the causational factors. And in doing that, there were things that I became aware of, such as trauma, things that I became aware of, such as mental illness, and a number of factors that initially I never took into consideration. Now, it did not give me a view where I did not value the enforcement piece. It just put the enforcement piece in a different perspective for me. And it gave me another perspective that I had to take into consideration, and I did take into consideration, uh, which was a much more expanded view of the issues as a whole. One of the other things that you and I talked about is we talked about how sometimes, these concepts, these words, and these phrases that we use them in a narrow or a microscopic uh, position. And so one of the terms that I became familiar with that is polarizing to some people, but when you begin to kneel down into the expansive meaning of the word is harm reduction. And what we do in our work in our business as law enforcement officers is a form of harm reduction. And so we cannot be opposed to having a broad brush discussion about harm reduction as a whole. It doesn't mean that you agree or disagree with every aspect of it. What it means is that you're willing to put yourself in a position to be educated and understand every aspect of it. I think with what
Mm.
we're doing in combination with research and allowing research to drive us forward is what is putting us in a much better position where we don't view things today as we did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I came to understand that one of the reasons why cannabis was viewed the way that it was, as far as, the devil's drug, is that very little research was being done and money being made available, federal funds for research, as it relates to the benefits of cannabis. And that was one of the, I guess, most significant things from a research standpoint of cannabis being moved from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3. Now federal funds are being made available to research the not just the harms, but the benefits of it. Whereas in the past, that was the opposite. The research funding was being made available to research the harms of it. But now, as a Schedule 3, we can research the benefits of that drug. And any drug where at one point in time we were focused on the harms, where there are benefits, now maybe we can look at those benefits and and bring them to the forefront where they can be marketed and used in a fashion not causing harm, but maybe maximizing the benefits of those drugs being used to treat addiction and mental illness and some of the other challenges that we face emanating from the drug culture.
Yeah, it's a little bit like you're talking about not just looking at kind of the one side. It's kind of that expanded view of, okay, here's a substance that can cause harm. Some people are harmed by it. But what about the other side? Are there also positive benefits from this? There are all kinds of, I mean, pretty much every prescription drug you can get, it's a prescription because there's potential harm that comes from it. And yet there's also some benefits that come from it, sometimes significant benefits. And so kind of even with cannabis, taking that view, like we had talked about before of, it's not just that cannabis can cause harm, but what about its potential medical benefits? And we're beginning as an organization to kind of explore. We've done a lot of podcast episodes on like psychedelics for healing. It's not that psychedelics can't be harmful. They can be, but what about this other side? What about the potential that they have, particularly in substance use and mental health issues? And so that's a really interesting piece of that I think is often lost, because we tend to look at something in society and we say, oh my, has anybody been harmed by it? And if they have, then we go immediately to, well, let's ban it. Let's Schedule 1. Let's just, get it out of here. Instead of taking a beat, taking a few breaths to say, okay, let's understand, what is this that we're even dealing with? And are there benefits? Are there potential harms? How can we best approach that in a way that's going to reduce harm? That's an interesting concept. You talked about law enforcement as harm reduction, because I think most people think of harm reduction just as more of like a clinical term of reducing harm from substance use, so fentanyl testing strips or something like that. But I think of, before I even knew that term used in that way, we used the term reducing harm, which is just the flip-flop of those words, to talk about what we wanted to do as an organization related to drugs, drug markets, overdoses, the whole realm of drugs. We were trying to look at it in a way that reduced harm. And so I think that's a helpful point, and probably maybe a challenging point for listeners, but one to think about, that people like Colonel Maxwell are going to work as law enforcement officers thinking about, they want their work to reduce harm to society. And we may not all agree on all of the ways that harm reduction on the substance use side or the law enforcement side, that's just society. We have different opinions on things. I think it is really helpful, because my experience with law enforcement has been across the board with every officer I've talked to, and we have done presentations with lots and lots of officers, is that they are in it for that very thing. I want to help my community. I want to help society. I want to help reduce harm to people. And this is a way that I can do that. And so I think for us, when we think about, the impact that we hope our work has on law enforcement, is how can we help law enforcement do that even more? That even more of their time and effort is spent on things that, when you go upstream and downstream, really are reducing harm. And I think that's part of the conversation that we're having around substance use and addiction is everyone gets better outcomes. Everyone gets more of what they want when we approach a problem with a solution that's actually going to kind of fix the root cause of the problem. What do you think about all that?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges is stigma that is born out of confirmation bias based on how we're trained, based on and our education and lack thereof. I'll give you an example. Public safety is public health. Public health is public safety. Those two disciplines converge one on the other. If I get in a vehicle and I'm operating that vehicle under the influence of drugs or alcohol, okay, right now it's a public safety issue. However, when I'm involved in a car accident, it evolves from a public safety issue to now a public health issue because I have caused an accident resulting in harm or death to someone else driving a motor vehicle, or a bystander on a bicycle or walking around. So public safety issues can evolve into, and often do evolve into, public health issues, and vice versa. But we often don't have conversations with public health professionals, specifically when we talk about drug trafficking, because drug trafficking is a public safety issue that facilitates and precipitates a public health issue, as was COVID-19 a public health issue that precipitated public safety challenges and issues as well. And so one of the things that we have to do as law enforcement professionals is we have to realize that confirmation bias is driving us to have this thought process of minimization when it comes to harm reduction. But every time we arrest someone who is violating the law, particularly if that person was involved in committing, crimes that are deemed to be targeted at other individuals, that we are reducing harm because we are removing that person from a community, preventing them from causing harm to someone else, to another individual or another family in that community. So every time we act within the capacity of our duties, and we do it effectively and legally within the confines of the Constitution, we are in effect reducing harm. We're in effect reducing trauma. That is harm reduction.
I love that you pointed out this intersection between public health and public safety, because I think that's where a lot of the frustrations come, is because there are so many of these issues, especially related to substance use, where one becomes the other. You think about like alcohol consumption. Well, if you're just drinking, maybe you have a problem drinking, and that's really a health issue for you. But if you go and get behind the wheel of a car and you're out on the road, like 30 seconds has changed the public health issue now into a public safety issue. Now there's two issues going on. You've still got the health issue. Now you got the safety issue. And now we want to help you with your addiction, but you're now putting people's safety in danger. And so I think that is a good thing for us to wrestle with, especially for people who may struggle with the role of law enforcement in kind of anything related to substance use. We have to acknowledge that these are connected issues. It is, and there is an appropriate role for law enforcement on the public safety side to not just say, well, we have compassion for people's substance use. We can have compassion for the reasons why they're using. That does not give people license to create harm out in the public square for other people without consequences. And so how, zooming back out to kind of how has your perspective changed, whether through schooling, through a career, through your natural curiosity, which is obviously you're a curious person and you like to learn. So how has your view of substance use changed? How do you think about it now? How do you hope that we can, on the law enforcement side, think about it more in terms of just even how the systems within law enforcement think about addiction?
Addiction is an illness. It's an illness, as is diabetes is an illness. Addiction is an illness, and it should be viewed as such. One of the misunderstandings and misconceptions, not only among the law enforcement discipline, but just many in the public, is this. Many people think that detox is treatment and that treatment is recovery. But detox is a part of the process where one begins to enter into treatment. And treatment is the process of you entering into recovery. And recovery is for the rest of your life. You probably at some point in time heard this. I know I heard it plenty growing up. Why are you doing this? And we always ask the question, why are you doing this? Why did you do this? We never ask the questions like, what happened to you? What's going on with you? Let's go see a professional. Let's find out and let's identify what are the driving factors here. And so when someone enters into recovery and they relapse, those are the first questions. Why are you doing this? Well, you're still living with that illness. It's just that, you are in recovery. It's like, having cancer, but it's in remission. So what we've got to do is we, again, have to begin to understand the process of detox, treatment, and recovery. It just doesn't stop there. That helps us to understand the fact that, unfortunately, some people do relapse. As if I was diagnosed with cancer and I'm in remission, it may come back. And giving us a much broader understanding of addiction as an illness, which is what it is. For instance, I may be diagnosed with diabetes, and I may eat my way to diabetes, and I made those decisions, but it's still an illness. No one stigmatizes me for that. What we want to do is we want to get you some help. Let's get properly assessed. Let's get medically evaluated. Let's see if GLP-1 medications are appropriate for you. Well, it's the same if I decide my way into addiction, okay, and I'm in addiction, and my recovery program happens to consist of MAT, medically assisted treatment. Well, it would be the same as if I'm diabetic and I'm involved in a medically assisted treatment. It's just that the drug is a GLP-1 medication as opposed to some other medication that helps me with my addiction. You see where I'm going with that? But instead of having those conversations, we stigmatize MAT and we say, no, 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 no. You've got to stop. You got to stop now, and you can't ever use again. Well, I mean, I agree with that, but let's put that person in a position and set them up for success as opposed to failure. Recovery doesn't look the same for everyone. Just like success doesn't look the same for everyone, and neither does failure.
You told me recently that you always look for the clinical component. Now, as we were talking about different things, MAT and the role of MATs in incarceration and all of the different things that we can do and would love to see happen in the future. And also some things that both of us agreed maybe weren't such great ideas for the taxpayers to be funding. But what do you mean when you say I look for the clinical component when we're talking about responses to substance use and addiction?
Well, what I've learned is a program has validity when clinicians are involved. A program has validity when the empirical data was derived from scientific research that involved individuals who are actually doing the work. Psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, therapists, people who are boots on the ground, who are actually involved in doing the work. And a clinical component to any program should involve individuals who are working in those disciplines, bringing that clinical mindset, bringing that clinical experience, someone who can understand the clinical data and bring that clinical data to the table as a centerpiece for discussion, looking for that clinical component. There are a lot of people out there doing great work, and we want everyone to continue to begin to do the work that they're doing. But we, at some point in time, always have to look at the scientific data. Are we collecting data? How can we analyze that data? Let the data drive us in the direction of continuing to do things that are working for us, making adjustments for things that are not working as well as we want them to, and maybe eliminating things that are not working at all, as we discussed.
Yeah. Was the process for you over kind of this shift in your mindset, was that a painful process, uncomfortable process? Are you someone who loves to change how they think, and so it was just exciting to you? How did that feel to you, that process of changing how you think as you learned?
For me, it was extremely enjoyable. Nick Saban said something once. He said, "You either evolve or die," and that's the process of life. You know, you learn, you grow, you develop, you evolve, you succeed. And if you resist that process, then you won't be able to go from one stage to the other. And then 5 years from now, you won't be a part of the conversation because the information, the knowledge, the concepts, and everything that is at work and at play will have passed you by. And so putting yourself in a position where you're open to learning, growing, developing, and evolving, which allows you to continue to succeed, not just personally, but professionally. And that's the same way for any program. The reason why Coca-Cola has survived all these years and it's the top dog cola is because although the company has maintained the same recipe, their marketing has evolved. Their distribution pipeline has evolved. It's developed. They've grown over the time. And so that's why they continue to have success. It's a formula that companies like Coca-Cola and others who've been around for decades use, and we should begin to use it not only in our personal lives but our professional lives, particularly in addressing these issues that emanate out of the drug culture. What we did 5 years ago, it may still be having some impact, but we're not doing that the same way that we did it 5 years ago. You and I both remember when fentanyl test strips were considered paraphernalia, when although naloxone and Opvee were being used in a clinical setting, those drugs weren't made available to the public, but now they are.
Yep. Yep, things can change. They do change. We've seen it change. And we live in Mississippi, where change is really, really hard to come by oftentimes. And it's been exciting to see that happen. So if you had a young narcotics officer that approached you today and said, "Hey, what do I need to know? You've been in it 30 years, you know more than I do. What do you wish you'd known when you started out?" What would you tell them?
That process that I just laid out. Understand that you have to be open to learning, which is going to facilitate growth, which is going to facilitate evolution, which is going to lead to you being put in a position to succeed. Learn, grow, develop, and evolve constantly. Learn, grow, develop, and evolve constantly. Look for the clinical component. Research, understand the data, work to improve your decision making. That's critically important.
And for a lot of people, they might be nervous that if we shift towards a more clinical approach to addiction rather than just primarily an enforcement approach, that would just be weakening public safety. There's a lot of fear over what's going to happen. It's just going to be a free for all. Everybody's just going to be out there doing whatever. How would you respond to that? Of kind of that, where have you landed on that balance for addressing public safety and prioritizing public safety in the broader community while still understanding why people are using drugs and approaching that in a way that is helpful to them?
I don't think it's going to weaken public safety. We'll use a sports analogy, for example. The quarterback is important on the football team for a reason. The offensive tackle is important on the football team for a reason. the linebacker on the defensive side of the ball is important for a reason. We're all on the same team, just playing different positions. We all have the same goal in mind, and that is to improve the overall public health and public safety of communities throughout the state of Mississippi and this country. So we're all on the same team, just playing different positions, and we all, have a role to play in this. It doesn't minimize law enforcement. I think it enhances law enforcement. And I think what we do, when we do it from the standpoint of having a broad brush understanding that people are making these decisions because of external and internal factors, and addiction is a disease, and you can't wake up one morning and just say I'm no longer going to use, because it changes the way that your brain functions cognitively. Okay, and what we should not do is distance ourselves from the medicinal ammunition that we are afforded due to the pharmacological research that takes place in this country. And we should bring every tool to bear, because even though the CDC is reporting that we've had approximately 27% reduction in drug-related overdose deaths from 2023 to 2024, a little bit more than 100,000 to just over 80,000. 80,000 people is still too many people. That's still too many American lives lost due to something that is preventable. And drug-related overdose death is preventable. Other issues that emanate out of the drug culture, suicide, preventable. All of these things are preventable, and we should bring every tool to bear, and no one diminishes the other. I think they complement one another and make them just as much as effective and impactful.
If you could change one thing today that you think would have a positive impact on this issue of how law enforcement respond to substance use, what do you think it would be?
Having a much more expanded view about all of the avenues that we can pursue to not just reduce, but eliminate drug-related overdose deaths. That means having conversations for some people that may be uncomfortable. That means having conversations for some people that are very welcomed. We have to begin to discuss every option that is available to us, because these issues are impacting everyone across all population demographics, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. They're just continuing to evolve. So we have to evolve with them in our concepts, in our thought process, our belief, values, morals, and norms, and our approaches. Like Nick Saban said, you either evolve or die. And we don't want to do that. Not before God's time, anyway.
Amen. Anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would. I would like to encourage, everyone that is involved in a discipline that intersects with these issues, particularly my law enforcement colleagues, to begin to position yourself to meet, network, and learn from other professionals like yourself. Learn about what organizations like End It for Good are doing, not just End It for Good, but organizations across the board. Just because you may not agree with everything on the surface, you may find that there's more that you do agree with and that you have in common with these organizations. Because again, um, just because an organization isn't completely aligned with what your goals are, doesn't mean that they don't have the same goal in mind. It would be like if you and I decided we were going to take a trip to Dallas. I decide to drive, you decide to fly. The goal is to get to Dallas. But in that, we're working to convince everyone else who's attending the conference to either drive or fly. It doesn't mean that one idea is better than the other. It's just two different experiences. I'm going to get to stop along the way and eat at all of the, mom and pop restaurants and talk about all the food that I ate on the way there. You, on the other hand, are going to enjoy some great airport food, and maybe some delays. But I also may run into traffic delays. So it's just the goal is the same. We're just taking two different routes, you know. And so I would just encourage, my law enforcement brothers and sisters and friends to expand your knowledge, you know, and learn about what efforts are going on that other people are involved in and other organizations are involved in.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. We always say we're we are happy to work with people who don't agree with us on everything. You and I don't agree on everything, but we found some great areas of commonality. In our discussions, this passion for MAT, for allowing medication to be available to people struggling with addiction, because we both know the research on that. It is, you're least likely to die, you're more likely to stay engaged in treatment and be in long-term recovery if you're using medication. Doesn't mean it works for everyone, but my gosh, we definitely shouldn't be preventing people from accessing what the research says is the most evidence-based treatment for an opioid addiction. And so, yeah, we're to only work with people who agree with us on everything, to me, is a fool's errand. I just don't think that gets us where we want to go, because there are a lot more things we can do together, and fentanyl testing strips is one of those. We worked with a lot of people on fentanyl testing strips that didn't agree with us on lots of the other policies and things we think would help improve life in Mississippi. That's okay. We can work on fentanyl testing strips together, shake hands, and we can part ways on the next issue if we don't agree on it. That's okay. We learn a lot, and other organizations that don't work in law enforcement learn a lot from law enforcement about the actual daily boots on the ground of what's happening, what the challenges are, and that informs us. That's a positive thing. We need to be hearing from each other outside of our own echo chambers and ecosystems of people who think like we do. That's how we become better people, better professionals, and for those of us engaged in work that we think is making the world a better place, it helps us make the world a better place faster. So, Colonel Maxwell, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming and sharing just your own evolution of thought over a career in law enforcement, and as continuing as you move into teaching and other things too. So thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. We'll see you next time on the End It for Good podcast. In the meantime, head on over to enditforgood.com and connect with us in one of the ways over there. And we will see you next time for another great episode with more great guests. So how do we shift our drug policies from a criminal justice approach to a public health approach? By inviting one person at a time to change their mind. Changed minds are the catalyst to changed laws. But many people are only willing to have this conversation when they're invited to by someone that they trust. That's you. Invite your friends, coworkers, other people in your circle of influence to consider a better way. At End It for Good, our hope is that people who hear will become people who tell. Start a conversation and join the movement to end it for good.